When someone vanishes without a trace, speculation rushes in to fill the void. In the case of Maura Murray, that speculation became a storm, fueled not just by the unknown, but by voices who saw her story as an opportunity. At the center of that storm is James Renner. Renner, a former journalist from Cleveland scene, began investigating Maura's case in 2011. He wasn't part of law enforcement, nor connected to the Murray family, but his blog posts, podcasts, and book drew widespread attention for all the wrong reasons. He has publicly insinuated that Fred Murray, Maura's father, may have abused his daughter or been involved in Maura's disappearance. He later suggested that Maura's boyfriend, Bill Rausch, could have killed her in a fit of rage. None of these claims are backed by evidence. They've been widely condemned by the family and the broader community. This isn't about silencing questions, it's about asking better ones. In tonight's episode, we're going to focus on how careless theorizing and personal agendas can cloud truth, distract from real leads, and inflict lasting damage. This is part 2 of our multi-episode series on Maura Murray. The episodes to come will explore other possibilities, exposure, foul play, and institutional failure. But tonight, we examine the harm done by one man's unchecked narrative. So, Angela, how's it going tonight?
I should be asking you that.
Yeah.
Bionic man.
Yeah, very true. So, full disclosure, I'm only about 3/4 here at best, I would say, tonight. And my throat feels like the anesthesiologist put like a 2-inch pipe down it wrapped in freaking barbed wire.
Oh.
So we'll see. I apologize in advance if my voice is raspy.
I fully intend to pick off the whole way.
Yeah, I expected nothing less, honestly. So, but we do ask our listeners to just be patient because for those of you that don't know, I did have surgery last Thursday.
He's a freaking beast to be here today.
And I'm trying for it to have as little impact on the show as possible, but you know, that's just not possible. It's going to impact it. And so
you're my spirit animal.
I can't. I don't know about all that nonsense, but I can't keep up the same pace after surgery as before. I just can't. So you're going to see a lull in, you know, how quickly episodes get released and stuff, because I just don't have, you know, 12, 14 hours of editing followed by 3 or 4 hours of writing and stuff.
All the while putting up with my crazy ass.
That part's easy. All right, so with that, are you ready to get started?
I'm ready.
So why don't you kick us off?
How am I kicking you off? You have more here.
No, I don't have any more there.
Oh, that's actually what you just said.
It is what I just
Well, I swear I have not taken any meds.
Yeah,
That's nope, that's a lie. I have taken Ativan today, so. Oh my. Well, if you didn't know, you're listening to Dark Dialogue. I'm Angela, that was John, and tonight's episode is a bit different. We're not walking you through crash scene timelines or scent trails. We're pulling back the curtain on something just as critical: misinformation.
So in part 1 of our Maura Murray series, we focused on some facts, the timeline, the people involved, the knowns and the unknowns. But this is part 2, and we're turning our attention to James Renner, one of the most controversial voices in this case. And I really debated on how we should handle this. I don't want to be out here, you know, throwing people, especially people in our community, under the bus. That's just not how I want to operate. But with Renner, some of the stuff he's done is so outlandish and irresponsible, and he's such a huge voice in this story that there's no way to honestly tell the Maura Murray story without dealing with him.
Right.
And hopefully our listeners know by now that with Dark Dialogue, we're going to call a spade a spade. I mean, we are going to call it like it is, and
especially
let
you.
the chips fall where they may. So that's what we're doing.
Gotcha. So, to be fair, his claims have taken an emotional toll on the Murray family. Misdirected investigative energy, such as diverting focus from the 2022 Haverhill search, and eroded trust in true crime communities, like John was saying. Julie Murray has publicly called his work exploitative. One time I'm supposed to have all those extra syllables, and I leave them out.
You're doing just fine.
In 2021, I did not ask for a review. In 2021, he targeted the family's Facebook page with false accusations, quickly debunked by the community.
In his blog, podcast, and 2016 book, True Crime Addict, Renner suggests that Fred Murray may have harmed or abused his daughter Maura. He later floated a theory that Bill Rausch, Maura's boyfriend, killed her during a fight. Neither story has any verified support, and both have drawn criticism for being deeply irresponsible.
And while those are the most harmful claims, they're not the only ones. Renner also proposed that Maura had a tandem driver helping her escape, that she ran off to start a new life, that she was headed to a hidden cabin, or even, most recently, that she was linked to a man named Stephen Baldwin in 2025. These theories are less inflammatory, but often equally unsupported.
So we'll examine those in future episodes alongside more grounded theories like exposure, foul play, and systemic failures in the investigation. But today, we focus on the narratives that cause the most harm.
And just to be clear, not every theorist has taken that route. Contrast Renner with Lance, that's an interesting name.
Reinsterner.
Reinsterner?
I think so.
And Tim Polari, hosts of Missing Maura Murray, say that 5 times fast, who explore ideas like exposure, foul play, or Maura running away. But they stick to known facts, like police dog trails, witness timelines, and they've earned the family's trust.
This episode is all about accountability, about drawing the line between healthy curiosity and reckless storytelling. If you've ever wondered how a missing persons case becomes internet folklore, then this is the episode for you.
They're all for you.
This is true, yes. So, like we said, James Renner isn't law enforcement. He's not a private investigator. He's a former reporter for the Cleveland Scene, a weekly alternative paper, and a self-described true crime addict. He began looking into Maura Murray's case around 2011, almost 7 years after her disappearance. And what started as a blog turned into interviews, then a book, then podcast appearances. And while some credit him for keeping the case in the public eye, his methods and motivations have drawn major criticism, and for good reason. In Renner's 2016 book, True Crime Addict, it's part memoir, part amateur investigation, but it's laced with erratic narration, speculation framed as fact, and a fixation on Maura that often feels more about him than about the truth. He openly writes about his obsession with people who vanish, and even admits to fantasizing about disappearing himself. That's not insight, that's projection.
He actually said he thought about disappearing like Maura.
He did. And it sets the tone for how he approached the case. Not with journalistic discipline, but personal fascination. From early on, Renner pushed theories that implicated people close to Maura. The most harmful of them all, he has repeated insinuations that Fred Murray, Maura's father, may have abused her or even played a role in her disappearance. There was absolutely zero evidence for that. No credible source, just innuendo presented as possibility. He would post out-of-context photos, selectively quote email exchanges, and then step back and say, quote, "I'm just asking questions." That's not responsible investigation. It's suggestion dressed up as curiosity. Fred Murray didn't engage with him, which was completely understandable, but Renner used that silence as ammunition, framing it as suspicious instead of protective. It wasn't just reckless, it was freaking cruel.
And people believed him.
Some did, some still do. And it's not hard to see why. When a well-spoken blogger or author lays out a theory in a confident voice, it feels persuasive, even when there's nothing under it. And Renner didn't stop with Fred. He eventually turned on Bill Rausch, Maura's boyfriend at the time, claiming that he may have been abusive and might have killed her in a fit of rage. Again, there was no confirmed evidence, just fragments, rumors, and circumstantial timelines that don't hold up under real scrutiny. He created stories, then stepped back and let the internet do the damage.
So it really became more about maintaining attention than solving the case.
Exactly. This wasn't about truth. It was about narrative control. He floated the idea that Maura had a tandem driver, that she was headed to a secret cabin, that she had started a new life. And in 2025, like just now, over 20 years after Maura vanished, he pushed an unverified theory connecting her to a man named Stephen Baldwin, whose own criminal exposure had nothing to do with Maura or the timeline of her disappearance, but that didn't matter. The more outlandish the theory, the more it spread. And in the midst of all of this, Renner escalated his attacks, posting misleading claims about Fred on the family's Facebook page, including unverified allegations about his behavior. These were swiftly debunked by longtime community members and researchers, but the damage lingered. Even a false accusation has a half-life online.
And it seems like he made himself part of the story.
He absolutely did. And he never hid that. His writing is full of personal tangents, confessions, emotional whiplash. That might work in a novel, but this isn't fiction. This is a real missing person, a real family, and a real trauma still unfolding 2 decades later. Renner made Maura's disappearance about himself, and in doing so, he shifted the public conversation away from truth and towards spectacle. That's why this episode matters, not because we're trying to make James Renner the villain, but because his behavior is a case study in how speculation can mutate into misinformation and how one person with a platform can derail real efforts to find answers. So let's dive into James Renner's core claims, the ones that did the most damage, garnered the most attention, and caused the most harm to Maura's family. Chief among them, the suggestion that Fred Murray, Maura's father, abused her, and that her boyfriend at the time, Bill Rausch, may have killed her. These weren't casual ideas floated once and then forgotten. These were the foundation of Renner's narrative for years. So let's start with Fred. Renner's blog and book insinuated that Maura's relationship with her father was not just strained, but abusive. He pointed to her decision to leave West Point, emotional difficulties, and what he framed as, quote, odd interactions. He also cited her secrecy in the days before she disappeared. But here's what he left out. Maura had been arrested for credit card fraud. She had crashed her father's car just days earlier. She was under pressure from school, family, and legal problems. These were stressors that explain her behavior far more plausibly than the idea of abuse. Yet, Renner ignored them to pursue his narrative. He repeatedly cited Maura's reported emotional struggles at West Point as signs of trauma, but there's no record of abuse. No cooperating witnesses, no police reports, no journal entries, just a young woman under pressure in a rigid environment, dealing with consequences that would stress anyone.
No, didn't he also try to use the weekend visit as suspicious?
Yeah, he did. Renner scrutinized Fred and Maura's weekend visit in February 2004 when they shopped for a used car and bought alcohol together. He painted the alcohol purchase as inappropriate, but Maura was 21 freaking years old.
Yeah.
I've got 21-year-old kids. It would be nothing out of the unusual to go to a liquor store and buy alcohol with your adult children.
Right.
This is no different.
Right.
This purchase was legal, 100%. And multiple witnesses, including family members, stated that the trip was normal. Fred was simply trying to help his daughter buy a car after hers had been wrecked. Something that is pretty damn cool to do.
Oh, shit.
As a father, And it also should be noted that Fred is not wealthy, not by any stretch of the imagination. He's as blue collar as they come. It was a blue collar family. The man doesn't have tens of thousands of dollars in the bank just waiting to buy his daughter a car.
Yeah.
This was a hardship for him, and one that he was willing to do because he loved his daughter.
And had to make sure she was safe.
Right. And Renner also focused on Fred's $4,000 in ATM withdrawals that weekend. 4 separate $500 transactions, which he framed as suspicious. He implied that the money might have been hush money or meant to fund a planned escape. But again, there's never been any link between that money and Maura's disappearance. The most consistent explanation is the simplest. They were shopping for a car. Julie Murray has directly addressed this claim, calling Renner's interpretation, quote, harmful, sensationalized, and dishonest.
So has Renner never used an ATM in his life? Does he not realize that there's limits and you have to take out?
This guy, and this really is the reason that I was like, we've got to address this guy, because it's so insanely dishonest that, no, I can't believe he's never used an ATM.
Yeah.
I think he knows exactly what's going on.
He's just spinning it.
But he spins it
Yeah.
into this sick thing. And I'm sorry, when you go insinuating that a father has molested his daughter, you better have a hell of a lot of evidence backing that up. And if you don't, it's sick.
Yeah.
And it tells me something about you.
Yeah.
Because you just don't come by that shit willy-nilly. That is probably the most serious allegation that you can wage against somebody, other than maybe he killed her, which Renner has also claimed. But honestly, as a father,
yeah, I'm around here, folks.
I would almost rather be accused of killing my child than molesting my child.
I agree. I agree.
So I don't know that there is anything worse than this.
Yeah, it's sick. It's terrible.
And I'll address this later on. I wrote it into the script. We'll address it. But the fact of the matter is anybody that's listened to any of our shows knows that I have no problem calling an asshat an asshat.
Yep. And
so
we love you for it.
If there was information that Fred was doing something untoward with his daughter, I would be the first one out there calling him a piece of shit. But you can't do that without evidence.
Exactly.
If there's no evidence, you can't just make it up and say, well, maybe. I mean, it's insane.
How animated you are.
So then there was the dorm room. Renner claimed that Maura's dorm room had been, quote, packed up, suggesting that she planned to flee and never return. And there was some packing up of the dorm room and stuff like that. There's no doubt about that. But this was another example of speculation dressed up as fact. According to UMass Police and Family, the room wasn't totally packed, but it was tidy, likely cleaned in anticipation of a short trip, not a permanent departure. Renner also framed Fred's initial reluctance to engage with media as suspicious, suggesting that he had something to hide, but when he failed to consider was grief.
Yeah.
Fred was a father in crisis. His daughter was missing. His privacy mattered. And distrust of media, especially after seeing early coverage frame him as suspicious, was a natural response. And not only that, but we've seen this shit before. I saw what happened to the Ramseys in 96, well before this. I've seen this happen in cases over and over again where once the media decides you're guilty, you're guilty. So I don't blame parents for being a little suspicious.
It is really not innocent until proven guilty.
Not
It's guilty until proven innocent.
Especially when the media is concerned.
Yeah.
And so Renner further suggested Fred's refusal to engage with him personally indicated a cover-up, disregarding Fred's focus on protecting his family. But Fred's silence wasn't some orchestrated strategy. It was about limiting exposure to irresponsible speculation and preserving what little control he had left. And I will say that Fred come out and he said, I read this guy, I knew exactly what he was going to produce, and I didn't want to have any part of it.
Right.
And boy,
Knew he was an asshat.
he freaking called that dead on.
So Renner's layering little details like the clean room, the cash withdrawal, buying of the alcohol, and weaving a story with no actual proof.
Exactly. It's circumstantial scaffolding. When you look closely, none of the pieces support the weight of his claim. He's relying on innuendo, not evidence. Now let's turn to Bill Rausch.
Let's do.
Renner's accusations about Bill evolved over time. Initially, he portrayed Bill as controlling or emotionally abusive. Later, he escalated dramatically, suggesting that Bill may have met Maura sometime after her disappearance, possibly up to a week later, and killed her in a fit of rage. There's absolutely no verifiable evidence that Bill Rausch was anywhere near New Hampshire at the time of Maura's disappearance. Matter of fact, we have evidence that he damn sure wasn't. And this isn't like, oh, I clocked in at the 7-Eleven where I work with my best friend who can sometimes stamp my card, my time card. No, he was stationed with the United States Army in Oklahoma, and like the military, don't like the military, they have a pretty damn good track record knowing who's where.
Yeah.
It's
a thing called AWOL.
You know,
the real thing.
They're not really known for losing track of their soldiers.
For long.
Not for.
If it happens, it doesn't last long.
And there's repercussions.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So Renner's theory hinges on the idea that Bill secretly traveled to the area, met with Maura, and then murdered her. But there's no witnesses.
He left a bill-shaped thing in his bunk while he was gone, and the army just...
Yeah, kind of like the Alcatraz escape. Yeah, there's no witnesses. There's no travel record. There's no credit card trail. There's no phone pings that support this. And what's even bigger than that is he's in the freaking U.S. military. Like, that is the most ironclad of alibis that I can possibly think of, except maybe, I don't know, I was on CNN Live.
Yeah.
Other than that,
see me right there. Yeah.
Or I'm in jail. Like short of I wouldn't even say short of the prison system. I would say that the military is better at keeping track of all of their soldiers. The prison system is keeping track of their inmates.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just not going to leave a military base without it being noticed, not to go to a whole nother state.
And
I mean, you might be able to run out and get to a liquor store and get back with a bottle without getting caught. Not very likely.
Yeah, try it.
You're not going to go from Oklahoma to freaking New Hampshire, murder somebody,
and
hide a body where nobody's ever found it.
Yeah.
And then somehow it's just so absurd.
Absurd is a good word.
And then Renner also pointed to a phone call between Maura and Bill before her disappearance, claiming that she was crying afterwards and that this was a sign of distress. But the timing and emotional tone of that call remain unknown. There's no transcript. There's no third-party witnesses. It's speculation at best.
Is she the only person to have ever cried after a phone call with anyone?
Is she the only 21-year-old woman to have cried after a phone call with her boyfriend
Exactly.
or fiance? I mean, it's so absurd. He then referenced a, quote, mystery woman voicemail
Of course he did.
found on Maura's phone post-disappearance, allegedly a voice saying, Maura, Maura. Renner used this to imply Bill's involvement, but phone records suggest it was likely a network glitch or an unrelated wrong number. Even law enforcement dismissed it as a lead early on. He also claimed that Bill threatened suicide if past allegations against him were made public. Another detail with no supporting evidence, just one anonymous source. These allegations stem largely from later accusations made by unrelated women years after Maura vanished. And even if true, they do not prove any involvement in Maura's disappearance.
So we're dealing with multiple layers of implication. First there was Fred, then there's Bill, and it just keeps shifting.
It does, and that's important. Renner's theories didn't remain consistent. When public opinion turned against one angle, like Fred, he pivoted to Bill. And when that began to lose momentum, he started amplifying other fringe theories. He was constantly reshaping the narrative to maintain relevance. He used every tool at his disposal, long-form blog posts, emotionally charged language, and selective media, like family photos or out-of-context quotes, to bolster his claims. He also invited online sleuths to dig deeper, crowdsource suspicions, and even contact witnesses or family members. His audience became part of the investigation, which blurred ethical lines even further. In 2021, Renner crossed a line that many researchers see as unforgivable. Me? He made misleading posts on...
Couldn't tell.
Yeah. This crossed the line so freaking far that any hesitation that I had about discussing this guy, it just goes away with what he did here. And that was that he made misleading posts on the Murray family's official Facebook page, implying that Fred was covering something up. The community pushed back hard, and these claims were quickly debunked by Reddit moderators and case experts. But the damage was done. Screenshots circulated, misinformation spread, and Maura's family had to once again defend themselves from baseless attacks. Even after 2021, Renner occasionally returned to the Fred allegations, despite widespread public refutation and community condemnation. And it didn't stop there. Renner's broader pattern of targeting extended beyond Fred and Bill. He briefly suggested that Maura's friends or acquaintances might be involved. These people weren't public figures. They were young adults thrust into a nightmare, and yet they were named, theorized about, and accused in public forums with absolutely no justification.
So not that I'd need to ask, but how did that affect the people involved?
Well, it took a toll. Emotionally, reputationally, and logistically. Roush has largely stepped away from public discussion on the case, and he's taken an onslaught of accusations for that. But let me just stop right here for a second and address Bill Roush. This guy he's a grown-ass man at this point. In his 40s.
Right.
He was a 21-year-old kid when this happened. To expect that this boyfriend is going to commit the rest of his life to this case is absurd.
Yeah.
Fred, her father, absolutely. You kind of expect that from a parent. From a boyfriend, and I mean, let's be honest, they talked about marriage and stuff, but they were having some problems. Chances are they probably weren't going to get married and spend their life together anyway. To expect this guy to not have a life because his girlfriend, fiance, whatever, disappeared at 21 is completely unfair, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think it's a crock of crap to say, since he moved on and has had relationships since, he must be a piece of shit.
We're handing you your life sentence to forever be haunted by her, and you cannot move on in any way.
And and I'll even up that one more and say, just reiterate, he had nothing to do with it. It's one thing if you had something to do with it, then you've made a decision and you get to be a piece of shit for the rest of your life. This guy, I mean, like we said, he was in the military. He was in a whole nother freaking state. Yeah. He couldn't have been involved. And yet his life is ruined and people judge him because he's not defined by his relationship when he was 21 years old.
Yeah.
And others have done the same, have stepped away just like he did. It forced people who were never suspects to relive trauma, endure suspicion, and defend themselves in front of thousands of internet strangers. And for law enforcement, it generated a flood of tips, often numbering in the thousands, many based on nothing but Renner's blog. In 2022, a search near Haverhill deployed cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. The attention came largely from renewed online buzz, not a new lead. And yet, time and resources were spent, possibly at the expense of more legitimate avenues.
So instead of bringing clarity, it created chaos.
Exactly. It delays justice by diverting resources, like the 2022 Haverhill search, and divides the true crime community with misinformation, overshadowing Maura. So in the next segment, we're going to jump in to cover the rest of Renner's unproven claims, the tandem driver theory, the off-grid cabins, Maura's supposed new life, and the 2025 connection to animal rights activist Stephen Baldwin. Each of these has captivated some corners of the internet, but none are supported by solid evidence. What they have in common is narrative power, not truth. So as public trust in Renner's most aggressive claims began to erode, allegations against Fred Murray, against Bill Rausch, he didn't back down. He pivoted. His theories didn't stop. They just mutated. What followed was a second wave of speculation, built not on concrete evidence, but on suggestion, coincidence, and what-ifs. The next phase of Renner's storytelling gave us the fringe theories, ideas that blurred boundaries between investigative inquiry and fiction. These included the tandem driver theory, the cabin in the woods hypothesis, the new life escape narrative, and then most recently, a speculative connection to convicted fraudster Stephen Baldwin. Often, Renner blended these theories together, suggesting a tandem driver who took Maura to a hidden cabin, or a secret pregnancy that drove her to flee with help. Each theory added layers of confusion rather than clarity. So let's begin with the tandem driver theory. According to Renner, Maura wasn't alone on the night of her crash. He posited that a second driver, a friend, a boyfriend, or a mystery man, was following her in another car. When she crashed her Saturn on Route 112, this person either picked her up or met her at a predetermined spot. It was clean, fast, and coordinated. It's a theory that plays well on paper, but that's where the support ends. Witnesses like Butch Atwood and Faith Westman reported seeing only Maura's vehicle at the crash site. No second car, no tire tracks, no vehicle departing the scene. The infamous red truck, which some believe may be relevant, was seen before the crash, moving in the opposite direction, not at the crash site. Police dogs followed Maura's scent eastward from her car and then lost it roughly 100 yards away. We talked about all of this in episode 1, but that suggests that she may have left the scene, but not that she necessarily got into another vehicle. And to me, that makes a lot more sense that she kind of started to walk and then somebody pulled up and offered her a ride, as opposed to she has somebody coming.
Yeah.
It was all planned. Why not just hang out at your car? You know, it's only a couple minutes and somebody's going to pull up and you can jump in. Why walk the 100 yards? It doesn't make sense. And then Renner also pointed to a call that Maura made to a friend about a rental condo in Bartlett, New Hampshire, as evidence that she was coordinating plans with someone else. But police determined the call was more of a casual inquiry and not connected to any planned disappearance. There's never been any proof of a coordinated escape or rendezvous that night.
So if the tandem driver theory doesn't hold up on witness or evidence grounds, why does it still get attention?
Because it fills a vacuum. Without clear answers, a theory that sounds logical becomes appealing, but that doesn't make it accurate. So now let's shift to the cabin theory. Renner has repeatedly floated the idea that Maura fled to or was taken to a remote cabin in the White Mountains. He referenced the UMass Outing Club's cabin in particular as a possible hideout. He painted a picture of Maura hunkered down in the forest, evading authorities and possibly relying on the help of others. Again, the issue is evidence. Law enforcement did check known cabins in the area. Volunteer searchers did the same. Nothing linked to Maura was ever found in or near those properties. The UMass cabin itself was searched. No trace. It's also worth noting the conditions. Surviving off-grid in the White Mountains, especially in winter, requires equipment, planning, and physical readiness. There was no indication that Maura had any of that. She left behind gloves, clothing, and supplies that would have been essential.
It's not just about being able to vanish. It's about being able to survive once you do vanish.
Exactly. And there was another problem with these theories. They feed into a larger one, the idea that Maura planned all of this.
Right.
That's the basis of Renner's new life theory. This one suggests that Maura orchestrated her own disappearance, that she was overwhelmed by school, family pressure, personal problems. She was pregnant. Her dad was molesting her. I mean, the list goes on and on. None of which...
Supposed.
Right.
Yeah.
And instead of facing it all, she just walked away. Some versions speculatively suggest Canada. Others posit that she's living in the Midwest, living quietly under a new identity. Some even claim that she got married and had children. Renner, at various times, has floated the idea that Maura may have been pregnant, like I said, a claim with absolutely no medical or testimonial evidence whatsoever to support it, and that this may have been her motivation for vanishing. There are several holes here, starting with logistics. Maura didn't empty her bank accounts. She didn't withdraw large sums of money. She didn't leave a note. She didn't even bring essential gear. No ID, no hiking equipment, no extra clothes beyond what she packed for a weekend getaway. Her computer was left behind. Her dorm room was tidy but not cleaned out. And as we discussed, her birth control was found in her car. Unlikely behavior for someone preparing to start a new life. And what the hell would she need birth control for if she was pregnant?
Exactly.
There's also the timing. We're not talking about a woman vanishing before digital tracking became pervasive. This was 2004. We had cell phone towers, ATM records, credit histories. Since then, we've had nearly 20 years of technological advancement, yet there's not a single verified trace of Maura. And if she did plan to disappear, why crash her car in an extremely visible spot on a state highway and then vanish without a trace into the narrow window between when Atwood left her and when police arrived?
It just doesn't make sense logistically or emotionally, for that matter.
It just doesn't make any damn sense at all.
At all, yeah.
And, you know, there are stories, we'll talk about it a little bit, there are stories of people that have disappeared and started a new life.
Mm-hmm.
But when you learn about those stories, you're like, who? You're not like, oh, that case. Oh, yeah. it's been like the biggest true crime case of the last 20 years. No, it's people you've never freaking heard of. The idea that, like, who knows why some of these cases are big and some aren't, but Maura Murray's case is huge in the true crime community.
Yeah.
One of the biggest in the last 20 years. The idea that she could just be wandering around out there in the Midwest somewhere and nobody's heard of her, nobody recognizes, it's ludicrous.
Yeah. Good word.
Yeah, it's just absurd.
Lots of good words tonight.
So, but that's an important point that you make, that it doesn't make sense logistically, emotionally, it doesn't make sense. The New Life theory doesn't just fail on the evidence level, it fails on the human level. It paints Maura as someone who abandoned her family, her future, her obligations, without telling a single soul. Not even her closest friends or siblings. It also places blame on her shoulders. It treats her disappearance as a choice rather than a tragedy, whether it was criminal, accidental, or something else. And what brings us to Renner's most recent and most controversial claim, his theory linking Maura's disappearance to Stephen Baldwin, a convicted animal rights fraudster from Ohio. In 2025, Renner began promoting the idea that Baldwin, who had recently been sentenced for defrauding dog rescues and euthanizing healthy animals, might somehow be connected to Maura's case. He pointed to several vague similarities. Both were in the early 20s in 2004. Both had ties to the Northeast, and both were former West Point cadets.
Guilty.
Yeah, absolutely.
Immediately.
Yeah.
One wonders what Baldwin did to Renner to just place
him. You don't have to do anything.
I know, but
all you got to do is meet some points on this freaking psycho's checklist, and all of a sudden, you're convicted.
John, you're going to be convicted.
I probably am, because I was in my early 20s, in the early 2000s. I'm older than Maura, but
you've been to the Midwest.
And I've never been to New Hampshire, but I've been to some of the places that she was at.
Yeah.
So I must be guilty.
Where is she, John?
I'm not telling. Because I haven't made it in Renner's book yet.
Go on.
So they were both in their early 20s in 2004. They both had ties to the Northeast. They were both former West Point cadets. Renner cited a 2025 fingerprint analysis for Maura's vehicle that he claimed matched Baldwin, but no law enforcement agency has publicly confirmed this match. But I'm sure that they reached out to him first.
Yes.
There's also no evidence. Yes. There's also no evidence that Maura and Baldwin ever met. No shared class schedules, no digital connections, no photographs, no confirmed links of any kind. This theory is built entirely on coincidence, not causation.
Which is reckless and especially harmful.
Exactly.
What is that?
Is scratching my cheek.
You're like feigning a tear.
I mean, it's just absurd. Her sister was at West Point with her. So does that make Julie guilty?
Oh, yeah. I think Renner is. I think he's diverting all of this to everyone else.
The guy is just so incensed with being in the spotlight.
I just had to say something so he'd come after me too. I can't let you be the only one.
Oh yeah, he'll probably come after all of us, but bring it, because this shit is all true, man.
Yeah.
I put a lot more research into this than what he has into his bullshit theories.
I really feel like he has something to do with it, since he's pointing all the directions elsewhere.
I don't think he has anything to do with it. I just think that, like, some of these cases, when they get big, if you can get attached to them, then you get big. Like, here we are, Podunk, we're a small, new podcast in Podunk, Wyoming, and we're talking about this piece of shit.
Yeah.
So it worked. I've seen him on the Maura Murray documentaries and stuff. It worked.
But if we piss him off enough, maybe he'll talk about us.
Yeah. Bring it on, James. So,
I think James is allegedly his name. James.
But to your point, it feels reckless and harmful, and it is, because when you start naming people without proof, especially people already convicted of other crimes, you're not solving a case. You're shifting suspicion. You're creating narratives, and you're opening the door for misinformation, harassment, and distraction. Renner also used Reddit, blog comment sections, and his Facebook page to amplify these theories. He engaged with users who ran with his speculation, crowdsourcing suspicions and letting others build conspiracy webs in real time. He never presented his claims as definitive, but he rarely walked them back either. The vagueness created a vacuum for internet sleuths to fill, turning hypotheses into maybes and maybes into false certainty. So where does that leave us? These fringe theories, tandem driver, hidden cabin, new life, Baldwin, have dominated conversations for over a decade, but they've done nothing to bring Maura home. They've created smoke, but no fire. They've distracted from leads that might matter. And in the process, they've deepened the pain for Maura's family. That's the part that pisses me off. And that's why I'm calling him out, because he went so far as to accuse Fred of sexually abusing his daughter. And that's a line that...
It's disgusting.
It's disgusting. So let's dive into the next segment. So
dare we dive in?
I told you tonight was going to be a little different.
Do you need a breather?
So when someone that you love vanishes, the grief doesn't wait for the headlines to fade. For Maura Murray's family, the search for answers began in cold February air and has lasted decades. But instead of support and solidarity, they face suspicion, distortion, and public interrogation. What should have been a private sorrow became public spectacle, and while online attention can sometimes help, in this case, it often hurt. At the center of that pain was a man who claimed to be searching for the truth. That man, again, is James Renner. But the ripple effect of his theories went far beyond just speculation. It reshaped relationships, fractured communities, and poisoned trust in ways still unfolding today. So let's start with the emotional impact on the Murray family. Fred Murray, Maura's father, became a target of relentless scrutiny. Renner's early blog posts didn't just question his behavior. They painted him as deceptive. He spotlighted Fred's early reluctance to speak with the media, turning it into supposed proof of something sinister rather than grief. Renner suggested that Fred's refusal to speak with him directly was suspicious, ignoring that many families dealing with public loss choose boundaries to protect themselves. And maybe Fred just thought you're a piece of shit and I don't want to freaking talk to you. Usa. Seven even accused Fred of orchestrating her disappearance. No evidence supports these claims, and yet they spread. Fred wasn't just grieving, he was fielding accusations, being watched, being blamed.
And it's hard enough to lose a child, but then to have the internet decide that you must be responsible for it.
Exactly. And like we said, Fred wasn't the only one. Bill Rausch, Maura's boyfriend at the time, faced accusations of emotional abuse, controlling behavior, and even direct involvement in Maura's disappearance. Renner amplified anonymous Reddit posts and unverified emails to build a case against Bill. Though none of these claims have been verified or confirmed by law enforcement, the damage was done. In 2021, a Facebook page originally advocating for Maura's case turned into a platform for smearing Rausch. The discussion wasn't nuanced. It was accusatory, harsh, and often unhinged. While some posts claimed to have insight, most were fueled by speculation and outrage. Julie Murray, Maura's sister, has carried the family search forward in the digital era. She launched a podcast, Media Pressure, to correct misinformation and restore nuance to the case. That podcast wasn't just a project, it was a reaction to the damage done by speculation. And she wasn't alone. Mueller's close friends, many of whom hadn't spoken publicly, were swept up in the storm. They were questioned, accused, harassed. Some received messages from strangers demanding to know what they were hiding. These were young people grieving a friend, suddenly forced to become case witnesses in the court of public opinion.
And these people didn't ask to be in the spotlight. They had just lost someone.
Right. And they had to endure the emotional toll of online outrage and rumor mongering. The wider true crime community didn't fare much better. Renner's presence on platforms like Maura Murray, the Reddit post Maura Murray, web sleuths, and his personal blog created a sharp divide. Followers debated every word that he wrote. Some defended his instincts. Others decried the damage. The result was polarization. People picked sides. Civil conversation eroded. In some cases, entire forums shut down threads because moderation became impossible. Search efforts were also disrupted. Early searches between 2004 and 2006 had already been impacted by speculative tips, many numbering in the thousands. These included cabin hunts inspired by tandem driver theories or alleged sightings. Some of these tips, likely influenced by Renner's writings, consumed resources and produced no meaningful evidence. By the time the 2022 ground search in Hampshire was conducted, based on a tip potentially driven by online speculation about the case, public trust in the investigation had fractured. Law enforcement, under pressure, searched new areas only to come up empty once again. The credibility of new leads began to wane. Worse, speculation strained the relationship between investigators and the public. Police, feeling cornered by rumor, became more hesitant to engage openly, further feeding distrust.
So it's a cycle. Bad tips lead to more failed searches, which leads to more anger, which fuels more bad tips.
That's right. And it's not just a waste of time, it's a diversion from real work. When law enforcement has to chase unsubstantiated leads, they lose time they could have spent revisiting physical evidence, talking to key witnesses, or seeking new forensic breakthroughs. This dynamic wasn't unique to Maura's case. Renner's influence set a wider precedent. In later high-profile disappearances like the Gabby Petito case, which we've come to know quite well here, unfortunately, we saw similar behaviors, wild speculation, digital witch hunts, and public pile-ons. People crowdsourced theories on TikTok. Families were accused before remains were even recovered. It was the Renner model, scaled up with more reach and fewer filters. In many ways, this became the formula. Build a following, stir controversy, drop a theory, and then watch it spread. And this formula turned real people, grieving, anxious, scared, into content.
And is that where we are now? Is every missing person case just a story waiting for the next twist?
Unfortunately, that's often what it feels like, but it doesn't have to be that way. The Maura Murray case reminds us that there's a cost to speculation. It's not just online noise. It causes real harm, emotional, psychological, and investigative. Families lose trust. Friends retreat. Police grow defensive, and cases become harder, not easier to solve. But there is still time to change course. Crowdsourcing is one of the most powerful tools in modern investigations, and also one of the most dangerous. It all depends on how it's used. And at its worst, it becomes a runaway train, hurling accusations, doxing innocent people, disrupting official efforts, and re-traumatizing families. But at its best, it becomes a lifeline, a mechanism to support grieving families, a pressure valve a pressure valve when systems fail, and occasionally a path to justice. So this segment is about the people who tried to get it right, not the ones who stirred chaos for clicks, but the ones who exercised discipline, the ones who understood what responsibility in true crime isn't optional. It's the price of admission. So let's start with two of the most persistent and transparent voices in this space, and that's Tim Pellery and Lance Reinsterna. And so, although their names are terribly hard to pronounce, right? These two dudes launched the Missing Maura Murray podcast, and I have oodles of respect for these guys. So they weren't career detectives or investigative reporters. They were just kind of like us. Just two curious minds with a commitment to following Maura's story wherever it led. In the podcast's early years, their approach leaned on exploration. They conducted interviews with eyewitnesses, former law enforcement officials, private investigators, and even internet sleuths. Occasionally, that meant engaging with unverified claims, such as a 2016 episode discussing local subjects based on unconfirmed community tips. That moment marked a turning point. Rather than entrenching into the speculation, the host began seeking out qualified experts, bringing in former U.S. Marshal Art Roderick and longtime private investigator John Smith, who had worked on Maura's case for over a decade. They focused more on refining timelines, identifying investigative gaps, and giving voice to family perspectives. Their work aligned with podcasts like Crime Junkie and The Vanish, fostering more structured, sustained conversations around cold cases without losing sight of the human cost. They didn't claim to have the answers, but they stayed with the story.
And that commitment matters. They didn't drop a season and walk away. They stuck around, even when things got uncomfortable. Even when their early choices were criticized.
Exactly. They engaged with criticism in real time. When mistakes were pointed out, they acknowledged them, corrected course, and kept going. In some episodes, they revisited previous discussions with updated context or new witness input. Importantly, they remained open to Julie Murray's voice throughout the process. She wasn't just a guest. They viewed her as a core participant. She helped clarify timelines, dispel rumors, and redirect speculation toward productive lines of inquiry. Even with criticism from skeptics, few could argue that Pellery and Reinsterna weren't earnestly trying to get it right. If they offered transparency and longevity, then Maggie Freeling brought something else, restraint and clarity. In 2017, she produced and hosted The Disappearance of Maura Murray, a 6-part documentary series for Oxygen. If you haven't seen it, if you have any interest in the case, I strongly recommend it. She did an outstanding job. And where others might have framed the case with ominous sound clues or conspiratorial language, Freeling stuck to facts. She laid out what was known, explored theories with caution, and declined to sensationalize what couldn't be proven. One of her most impactful choices was to revisit the interaction between Maura and Butch Atwood, the last known person to see her. Freeling's team re-examined the timeline, cross-referenced law enforcement reports, and interviewed Atwood directly, providing clarity that had been obscured by years of speculation. She also re-examined how quickly law enforcement defaulted to the assumption that Maura was a runaway, challenging why the narrative took hold so early and what was lost in those critical first hours.
And unlike a lot of creators, she didn't just chase mystery. She showed respect. She made space for the people involved, even if that meant fewer juicy headlines.
That's right. In the 2024 Media Pressure interview, Julie Murray expressed support for ethical media that collaborates with families, reflecting her experience with creators like Freeling and CBS Boston. That endorsement wasn't about flattery, it was about process. Freeling didn't work around the family, she worked with them. And, you know, I've got to say too, like, she didn't just throw Renner's stuff out. He was on the show. And he said, everybody has a reason to lie. Everybody in this case has a reason to lie. Everybody's going to lie to you. I mean, she showed all that shit. But then she sat down with Fred and she was like, so he accused you of molesting your daughter. I mean, she did it in a very ethical way and was like, you know, I got to ask you this question. It's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's how you do this shit. You don't just wildly throw shit out there and then just hide in the trenches and wait for, I mean, I don't know. It's just disgusting when I see somebody, especially go after families like this. But to go after anybody that's innocent or you have no evidence to suggest that they did something.
Definitely.
But anyway, her approach aligned with ethical podcasts like The Vanished and Crime Writers On, which prioritize consent, careful sourcing, and emotional awareness in their storytelling. Those shows may not have devoted full series to Maura's case, but their tone and methodology echo the same principles. What Freeling demonstrated more than anything else was that respectful storytelling can still be compelling. You don't need to fabricate drama when the truth is already hard enough. So now let's talk about crowdsourcing, not the Reddit kind, but a structured, disciplined kind. And that's where Sheila Wysocki comes in.
To this one too?
Well, to the whole idea of ethical crowdsourcing, yes.
Nice.
So as we talked about before, you know, when we covered Lauren's case, Sheila is a licensed private investigator and a survivor advocate. Wysocki made national headlines through her work on the Lauren Agee case. And just quickly, for those that haven't listened to the episodes, Agee died in 2015 under suspicious circumstances during the Wakefest boating festival in Tennessee. The death was ruled an accidental drowning, but Agee's mother wasn't convinced.
Neither are we.
Neither are we. Wysocki took the case and brought it to the public through her podcast Without Warning. In episode 3, she collaborated with a forensic pathologist to examine Agee's autopsy findings, specifically the presence of bruising, lack of water in the lungs, and discrepancies in tissue oxygenation. The episode didn't accuse anyone directly, but it did raise valid medical questions that reinvigorated interest in the case. More importantly, Wysocki didn't allow public participation to become a free-for-all. She built clear guidelines. Tips were reviewed before being aired or published. Family approval was required for sensitive materials. Licensed experts were prioritized over online theorists, and speculation was labeled and discouraged when unproductive.
She basically built the podcast version of an actual investigation protocol.
Exactly. It was organized, intentional, and respectful. The same philosophy inspired our own adoptive victim initiative here at Dark Dialogue. We've designed it with similar strict controls, tip submission protocols, secure channels, expert reviewers, and designated moderators. Participants are encouraged to focus on FOIA requests, timeline reconstruction, and media accountability rather than personal theorizing. And that's the difference. You can crowdsource help. You just have to crowdsource responsibly. So let's break that down. What does responsible true crime coverage actually look like? First, it centers on the family. Ethical creators treat surviving relatives as active participants, not just sources. Freeling involved Murray's from the beginning. Pellery and Reinsterna built episodes around Julie Murray's input. They didn't just check in, they collaborated. Second, it corrects mistakes. The Missing Maura Murray podcast made missteps early on, but they owned them. They adjusted, They issued clarifications, they invited criticism and responded to it. Third, it labels uncertainty. When facts were missing, Freeling said so. She didn't fill gaps with eerie music or half suggestions. She let silence speak when it needed to. And fourth, it protects the vulnerable. No accusing without evidence. No sensationalizing trauma. No exploiting victims for clicks. Period.
And maybe most important, it knows when to shut the hell up.
Yeah.
When to wait and when to say, we just don't know.
Exactly. Because speculation is not harmless. It has ripple effects. It distracts from real leads. It destroys reputations. It creates noise that law enforcement has to wade through. And if we're going to hold institutions accountable for poor investigations, we need to hold ourselves accountable for how we talk about those investigations.
Definitely.
And that was a huge part of it for me in considering this whole episode. And I really went back and forth trying to figure out how to address this. But at the end of the day, if you've listened to any of these shows, because it happens quite frequently, then you'll know that if a cop is a piece of shit, I have no problem saying that cop is a piece of shit. But if a true crime buff is a piece of shit, then if I'm honorable in this approach, whether I'm right, wrong, indifferent, whatever, but if I really am standing for something, then I need to call the true crime buffs a piece of shit for being a piece of shit, the same as I do law enforcement. This isn't about taking sides. It is about calling people pieces of shit.
Exactly.
So we want to be transparent here. Dark dialogue is relatively new in this space. We're learning every episode, every segment. We are not experts, but we're trying to follow the example of people who are. Tim Pellery and Lance Reinsterna had been covering Maura Murray's case for nearly a decade. Their perseverance, their transparency, and their willingness to adapt set a standard we're still trying to meet. Maggie Freeling showed what respectful, family-centered investigative journalism can look like, even in a space flooded with clickbait. And Sheila Wysocki proved that crowdsourcing isn't the problem. It's the way you structure it that matters. We're standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, people who didn't just tell stories. They built frameworks, created expectations, made ethics part of the genre's DNA.
So if we've gotten anything right so far, it's because they did the hard work first.
Yeah. So this isn't just a segment about ethics. It's a thank you to everyone who made it okay to say, I don't know yet. To everyone who kept showing up when the trail went cold. To everyone who helped move true crime forward without pushing families aside. And to you, the listeners, we trust you to question us, to hold us to this standard, to help us do better. Because when speculation becomes careful inquiry, when the crowd becomes a community, and when creators choose responsibility over reach, then maybe we're not chasing shadows anymore. Maybe we're making space for the truth. So let's talk about crowdsourcing, because in the world of true crime, it's either a tool or a trap. Done right, it can illuminate overlooked details, reconnect cold leads, and bring hope to cases left in the dark. Done wrong, it becomes a megaphone for suspicion, harassment, and misinformation. The difference isn't in the method, it's in the mindset. There's a reason we're devoting this entire segment to the ethics of collective investigation, because if we don't talk about it responsibly, we can't talk about results. And if we want to change how true crime gets told, from sensationalism to sensitivity, we have to lead by example.
You've heard us say it a dozen times already in this series. Real people, real consequences. When speculation runs unchecked, the collateral damage falls hardest on the families, the people still hoping for answers, not assumptions.
We know that from experience, and we've also learned from the ones doing it right. One of those people, like we said, is Sheila Wysocki.
Who was an absolute force of nature.
Yeah. And she's that private investigator and advocate who's carved out a legacy defined by diligence, empathy, and structure. She doesn't chase headlines. She doesn't weaponize theory. Her method is rooted in verification, collaboration, and family-centered communication. In her work, no detail is too small, but no assumption is allowed to snowball. She begins by listening to families, not mining them for drama, but engaging them as experts in their loved one's life. She builds rapport, she outlines boundaries, and she investigates with transparency. Her approach rejects the sensational. Instead, she cultivates long-term trust and puts ethical guardrails in place, ensuring survivors are empowered, not exploited.
And she holds herself accountable. If a source is unreliable, she says so. If a lead turns out to be wrong, she owns it. There's no bluffing to keep the audience interested. That's the difference.
Wysocki's role in the 2018 resurgence of interest in Amber Hagerman's case is a strong example of how this works in practice. While the case was long considered cold, she didn't approach it with the goal of solving it overnight. Instead, she helped draw renewed public focus, working closely with Amber's family, reviewing known facts, and offering strategic public outreach that encouraged leads without engaging conspiracy. Just as important, she equipped others to follow suit. Through podcasts like Without Warning, Wysocki modeled what survivor-centered investigation looks like. She introduced frameworks for evaluating tips, balancing public input with private harm, and pursuing truth even when it doesn't produce neat conclusions.
And that's what we mean when we talk about doing things the right way. It's not about being perfect, it's about being principled.
Another great example, True Crime Garage. If you listen to them, you know that they stay grounded. They avoid clickbait. They cite their sources. They don't float wild theories just to keep the conversation going. Instead, they highlight cases with compassion, research carefully, and make space for victims without sensationalizing the pain that they've endured. Their consistency has made them one of the most trusted voices in this space, and they earned that by sticking to the facts and respecting their subjects. In many ways, they show how a platform can inform and engage without feeding into speculation addiction.
They also stay in their lane. They don't pretend to have all the answers, and they don't let ego override ethics.
That ego factor, let's talk about that. Because for all the responsible creators out there, there are also voices who have done serious harm by stepping over the line between inquiry and accusation. In the Maura Murray case, the most infamous example is James Renner. Renner gained attention early on in the case for filing public records requests and uncovering documents through FOIA. That part, no issue. In fact, it's a tool that we strongly encourage in responsible advocacy. But what came next set the tone for a disturbing pattern. In his blog and book, Renner regularly framed Maura through a lens of scandal, suggesting affairs, secrets, and a double life without verifying his claims. And he didn't stop there. In 2016, Renner published a blog post suggesting that Maura had been spotted in a Canadian store by an unnamed source. There was no corroborating evidence, no second witness, no validation, but the claim exploded across Reddit and Facebook groups. What could have been quietly dismissed as rumor instead gained traction, fueled by Renner's platform and the vacuum of concrete answers in Maura's case.
It was like watching gasoline get poured on a campfire. One spark, and suddenly everything was smoke and chaos.
Exactly. Renner's Reddit AMA didn't help. He entertained every theory under the sun, often without distinguishing between fact, possibility, and complete fabrication. And the fallout wasn't just digital. Maura's family, particularly her father Fred, became the focus of ugly online accusations that began with speculation and escalated into slander. We don't bring this up to rehash the damage. We bring it up because it's a cautionary tale. This is what happens when crowdsourcing lacks structure, when theories outweigh facts, when content creators prioritize being first over being accurate.
And that's the world we're trying to build something better in, which brings us to Adopt a Victim.
Yes, we launched the Adopt a Victim initiative with one goal: to channel the power of collective effort into something useful, respectful, and rigorous. But we're not here to reinvent the wheel. We're here to improve the terrain. This is a visionary program, emphasis on visionary. We haven't solved a case yet. We haven't identified an unknown person. But that's not the measure of success at this stage. What matters right now is that we're building the framework that makes future progress possible. Here's how it works. Volunteers choose from a curated list of adoptable cases, ones with verified documentation, open investigative leads, and strong potential for constructive work. No one can freelance or go rogue. A case must be officially added to the program before any research begins.
And every case we add gets reviewed beforehand to make sure it's appropriate for community involvement. That means looking at available records, identifying what gaps still exist, and ensuring no active investigations would be compromised by outside attention.
Once a case is active, volunteers go through onboarding. That includes ethics training, confidentiality agreements, and skill matching. So FOIA experts can file requests, researchers can handle archives, and digital sleuths can help organize timelines and public records. No one is ever thrown in without guidance. And everything produced through Adopt a Victim, notes, timelines, source logs, reports, becomes the intellectual property of Dark Dialogue Enterprises. That's not about control, it's about consistency. It ensures findings don't get leaked, misrepresented, or used out of context by third parties. Volunteers are not allowed to publish or distribute materials independently. We maintain that line to preserve the integrity of the work and the dignity of the people involved.
Because what happens when you don't have that? Look around. Message boards flooded with misinformation, Reddit threads spinning out of control, families reliving trauma while strangers dissect their lives like puzzles. And we are not doing that here.
No. Instead, we're focused on skill sharing and progress. Want to help with a case? Great. Let's figure out where you can do the most good. Maybe that's scanning newspaper archives. Maybe it's analyzing case files. Maybe it's connecting dates or filing open records requests. It's not about flashy theories. It's about disciplined work and team accountability. And again, we're just beginning. There are no solved cases to showcase, no breakthroughs to brag about, but that's okay because we're in it for the long game.
And we're doing it in a way that lets everyone grow. Our volunteers get real experience, real tools, and real community. They're not working in isolation. They're part of something that's structured to last.
If you've made it this far into this episode, chances are you care about this too. Chances are you're tired of true crime as entertainment, tired of watching armchair detectives twist facts until they fit a headline, tired of exploitation that gets passed off as curiosity. We hear you, and we built Adopt a Victim for people like you. If you want to help, if you want to contribute your skills and your time to something rooted in truth, visit darkdialogue.com and click on the Adopt a Victim tab. Learn about our process, see the available cases, sign up if you're ready, or just send a message and let us know what you're passionate about.
Because it's going to take all of us to make a dent in this problem, not just the pros. Not just the podcasters, everyone.
The power of the people is real, but so is the responsibility that comes with it. So let's rise to meet both. True crime is more than a genre. It's a pact with the truth. Every story we tell unearths raw grief, revisits unanswered questions, and asks listeners to bear witness to human loss. That power demands care, because when we prioritize narrative over evidence, or clicks over compassion, we cross a line that can't be uncrossed. In Maura Murray's case, that line has been trampled on for over 20 years, leaving her family to navigate a maze of rumors, accusations, and half-truths. At Dark Dialogue, we're not here to add to that noise. We're here to redefine how these stories are told with empathy, evidence, and a commitment to the people at the heart of the case. This segment isn't just a reflection. It's our pledge. There's a line that we will not cross.
This isn't hypothetical. When someone like James Renner accuses Fred Murray of harming his daughter without a shred of proof, it doesn't just hurt Fred. It fractures a family, misleads the public, and buries Maura's truth under speculation. That's not investigation. That's betrayal.
We spent this episode dissecting how those theories ignite and spread, often with devastating consequences. Renner's 2011 blog painted Maura's life as tabloid drama, hinting at unverified scandals, secret relationships, personal crises that lacked any substantiation. His 2016 blog post about a supposed Canadian record store sighting, unconfirmed by police or witnesses, sparked a wildfire of Reddit threads and media coverage, suggesting Maura chose to vanish. His 2016 Reddit AMA amplified this, inviting unsourced tips that fueled baseless claims like family cover-ups. This isn't curiosity, it's narrative inflation, prioritizing a gripping story over the truth. And the Murrays have paid the price. Diverted investigations, public suspicion, and endless trauma. True crime can illuminate forgotten cases, amplify survivor voices, and drive accountability, but only if it's rooted in ethics. Sheila Wysocki shows us how. A private investigator, an advocate, Wysocki doesn't chase headlines. She builds trust with families, verifies tips through forensic experts, and shares only what protects ongoing investigators and survivors. Her 2018 work on Amber Hagerman's case, coordinating DNA retesting and media outreach without exploiting the tragedy, exemplified survivor-centered advocacy. Her methodology is meticulous. Engage families as partners, cross-check claims with investigators, and maintain transparency. She trains others, especially women, to investigate responsibly, ensuring every action honors the victim. Her podcast, Without Warning, offers insight, not sensationalism, proving advocacy can be powerful without being predatory.
She's a beacon in a crowded space, and she's not alone.
Like we said, True Crime Garage is another model. Nick and the captain have built trust through restraint, focusing on facts over flair. Their coverage of the Delphi murders prioritized verified timelines, avoiding suspect speculation despite public pressure. And in the Amy Mahalovic case, they encouraged tips while honoring her memory, never implicating her family. They label speculation clearly, credit sources, and keep victims central, fostering audience trust and setting a standard for ethical engagement. Their impact extends beyond cases. They've shaped how listeners approach true crime, emphasizing accountability over entertainment. That's the legacy that we're chasing here at Dark Dialogue. Inspired by Wysocki and True Crime Garage, We've launched the Adopt a Victim program, a vision for ethical crowdsourcing that channels public passion into disciplined progress. This isn't a Reddit thread or a viral stunt. It's a structured collective where volunteers contribute with purpose, guided by strict ethical boundaries. Like we've said, cases are vetted for verifiable records, investigative gaps, and progress potential, ensuring no active probes are compromised. And volunteers can't freelance. They select from the list that's been curated or request case inclusion, but nothing moves forward without core team approval. Onboarding includes ethics training, digital security protocols, and a skills survey, matching FOIA experts, archivists, genealogists, or timeline builders to case needs. All findings are Dark Dialogue's property, prohibiting independent publication to safeguard case integrity and to protect families.
It's a high standard, but it's non-negotiable. Families don't need strangers speculating on social media. They need rigorous, respectful work that supports their search for answers.
We're candid. Adopt a Victim is new. It hasn't resolved a case yet, and we're not claiming victories. We're building a scalable system to support archival research, case visibility, and investigative referrals, fostering a community that prioritizes truth over fame. Volunteers, whether researching local records, filing FOIA requests, or organizing timelines, are trained to contribute quietly, ensuring every step respects the victim's dignity and the family's trust. This vision is long-term. It's about creating a legacy of ethical advocacy that endures, not chasing fleeting headlines. When creators like Renner ignore these boundaries, the damage is lasting. The Canadian sighting claim wasn't just unverified. It misled investigators and convinced some Maura chose to disappear, ignoring crash site forensics like her abandoned car. The Fred Murray accusations, repeated without evidence, exemplify the illusory truth effect. Lies gain traction through repetition, not reality. Families in cases like the JonBenet Ramsey case, Madeleine McCann, or Karen Horman face similar scrutiny, not for evidence, but for narrative appeal. This pattern, amplified by blogs, forum, and unchecked media, stalls investigations, and it re-traumatizes survivors. It's a betrayal of the truest true crime demands.
It's not just careless, it's actually cruel. And it's why we're here to do better.
We're not infallible. We'll stumble, but we'll never knowingly cross that line, and we won't accuse anybody without evidence. We won't trade truth for narrative, and we'll always honor the human beings behind these stories.
If empathy isn't our guide, we have no business telling these stories.
Exactly. That's why we're broadening our lens. In the next segment, we'll explore how theories gain traction, why the public often backs the wrong ones, and what real investigative work entails. Through Maura's case, we'll dissect timelines, forensic logic, and the biases that distort our understanding.
Because Maura's truth deserves clarity and not chaos. And we're committed to pursuing it the right way.
Maura Murray's case has haunted us for over 2 decades, not just because it's unsolved, but because it's become a magnet for speculation. Online sleuths, Reddit threads, and true crime fans have built timelines, swapped theories, and debated every detail of February 9th, 2004. That passion can feel like progress, but without the right framework, it's often just noise. Public misconceptions about investigation don't just cloud the truth, they can bury it. Real investigators aren't driven by hunches or viral posts. They're grounded in forensic logic, evidence prioritization, and disciplined analysis. But when amateurs chase narratives over facts, they risk derailing credible efforts. So in this segment, we're breaking down the difference between professional investigative frameworks and public pitfalls, using Maura's case to show where things go astray and how we can do better.
This isn't about shutting down curiosity, it's about channeling it. The public wants to help, but without understanding how investigations work, that help can turn into harm. So let's dive into what professionals do and why it's different from what we see online.
Investigations rest on 3 pillars: physical evidence, verified timelines, and behavioral analysis. These aren't guesses, they're provable, testable, and foundational. Physical evidence. This is the bedrock. Your DNA, fingerprints, tire tracks, digital records, things that can be measured and matched. In Maura's case, the Haverhill crash site on February 9, 2004 offered tangible clues: a damaged black Saturn, spilled wine, backpack with personal items. Investigators started here, not with rumors about her motives, yet public theories often ignored these, focusing on Maura's mindset without forensic backing.
It's like building a house on sand. If you start with speculation, was she suicidal? Did she run away? You're already off course. Evidence first, always.
And, we pointed this out in the first episode because we were critical of law enforcement for jumping into a theory that she was just running away.
Yeah.
Because they didn't do a great job of starting with the evidence, what was on the scene. And I brought that up when we were talking about it. The evidence on the scene was, we have a crash with airbags deployed and a cracked windshield. And what did I say? I didn't say that.
That is, in fact, not what you said.
No, I did not throw my iPad at you.
Did you have to tell him what I did?
But I said, this evidence would tell me that we have a victim wandering around out there with a head injury. That's what the evidence should have told the investigators, but they dropped the ball.
Much like the tablet.
Yes. And then next we have verified timelines. The second pillar is a timeline constructed with precision. Professionals cross-reference witness statements, surveillance footage, phone records, and receipts. Maura's timeline is tight. Her last confirmed sighting at UMass Amherst, a liquor store purchase, and the Route 112 crash, all within hours. Yet public theories propose elaborate scenarios, cross-country escapes, secret rendezvous that don't fit this window. These ignore the timeline's constraints, wasting energy on fiction. Next, we have behavioral analysis. The third pillar examines patterns, victimology, player behavior, suspect interactions, Maura's actions, packing her dorm room, withdrawing $280, searching for lodging, suggests planning, but nothing confirms intent to disappear. Professionals analyze these patterns systematically, testing hypotheses against evidence. Public narratives like Renner's 2016 Canadian sighting claim leap past patterns to unverified stories, disregarding behavioral context. The public often starts backwards, a theory first, then cherry-picking the details to fit. That's confirmation bias, seeing what you want to see. Renner's Canadian sighting claim gained traction because it fed the runaway theory, not because it had evidence. Online, some latched on to Maura's cash withdrawal as proof that she fled, ignoring the crash site's physical evidence.
It's like a puzzle when you force the pieces to fit. The picture looks convincing until you realize it's wrong.
Yeah.
Which is kind of how I do puzzles.
We're never going to do puzzles together. It'll drive me crazy. Tunnel vision is another trap. Amateurs fixate on one angle, say Fred Murray's behavior, ignoring contradictory evidence. Renner's 2011 blog suggested Fred's involvement without any proof, leading some to dismiss leads like local suspects or foul play. Professionals test multiple hypotheses, ruling out each with data, avoiding this narrow focus. Lack of source verification is the biggest pitfall. Renner's 2016 Reddit AMA invited unverified tips, amplifying rumors like family cover-ups. Real investigators vet sources, witnesses, documents, forensics before acting. Public forums rarely do, turning hearsay into truth. Maura's case illustrates these traps vividly. The Canadian sighting theory, sparked by Renner's 2016 blog, contradicted the timeline. Her car was found hours after her sighting, with no evidence of travel to Canada. Yet, it persisted, diverting focus from the crash site's clues, tire tracks, personal items that suggested a different story.
And Fred Murray accusations? Pure narrative. No police report, witness, or forensic link ever implicated him. But the theory was sticky because it was dramatic, not because it was true.
These misconceptions didn't advance Maura's case. They stalled it, hurt her family, and left the public chasing phantoms. Professional frameworks like Wysocki's evidence-based approach start with what's verifiable. Physical evidence, timelines, patterns, not what's viral. The public can contribute, but it requires structure, like we've talked about with our Adopt a Victim program. It's the visionary program where volunteers can be trained to prioritize evidence, verify sources. The cases are vetted here. We determine whether they should be included or they should not be included. And we're not saying that we have all the answers, but it's our approach. It's my vision that I'm trying to make a reality. It's not about speed. It's about sustainability.
We're not claiming breakthroughs. We're building a foundation for ethical impact, one case at a time. We're doing it for John.
For my sanity. Stories don't just inform, they shape reality. In true crime, they define how we see victims, families, and the pursuit of justice. But when those stories prioritize drama over truth, they don't just mislead, they wound. Maura Murray's case is a stark reminder. For over 20 years, her disappearance has been eclipsed by narratives that thrive on speculation, not evidence. And media, blogs, podcasts, news outlets has fueled that distortion, turning a human tragedy into a viral mystery. This segment is about the ethics of those narratives and the accountability that we owe the people whose lives that we narrate. It's about why false accusations persist, how media amplifies them, and what it means to tell these stories responsibly. Because if we don't hold ourselves to a higher standard, we're complicit in the harm.
This isn't just about Maura. It's about every case where a family's pain becomes someone's content. We're creators too, and we're not exempt from this responsibility. We choose to build trust, not to break it.
False accusations thrive because they exploit human psychology. The illusory truth effect makes repeated claims feel true, even without proof. Renner's 2016 blog post about Maura's Canadian sighting wasn't verified, but its repetition across Reddit made it seem plausible. His 2011 blog insinuations about Fred Murray's involvement, though totally baseless, gained traction through familiarity. Confirmation bias fuels this. People seek details that fit their beliefs, ignoring contradictions. When Renner suggested Maura fled willingly, some fixated on her cash withdrawal, overlooking crash site evidence like her abandoned car. This bias turned theories into convictions, not for evidence, but for narrative fit.
Families like the Murrays or those in John Benet Ramsey's or Madeleine McCann's cases live this nightmare. They're not suspects because of facts. They're targets because of stories.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about like Maura's family in this case. We're talking 20 years, right? John Benet's, I mean, her mom's dead, but her dad, John, it will be 30 years next year. Next December will be 30 years that he's been dealing with this.
Yeah.
I mean, not quite half his life, but damn near. He was in his 40s when it happened, and he's I think he's probably in his 80s by now. So almost half of his life has been spent dealing with this bullshit and
grieving at the same time
and trying to grieve.
Yeah.
I mean, that man, and I know I'm getting a little bit off base here, but
where would we be if we didn't go?
Exactly. We wouldn't be us. But
it's true.
The truth of it is I fell to this. I was pretty young when that happened. That happened the same year I graduated high school, 96. And so I was a young, dumb kid, and I just ate it up. And back then we didn't have podcasts. We didn't have internet. We had what we were told by
their school specials.
Yeah, we had what the news told us.
Yep.
And in that particular case, it was the Boulder police. It wasn't somebody. I mean, to me, it's even more scandalous.
Yeah.
Because Renner is whatever he is, but he's nothing official.
Yeah.
I mean, officially, he doesn't have a legal responsibility to the truth, maybe maybe a moral one, but the Boulder Police Department and the Boulder DA's office have a freaking moral responsibility.
An ethical.
Yes, absolutely. And they decided that they were going to just try that case in the court of public opinion. I've never seen anything like it. And so I was sucked in. And for a long time, I didn't even know any of the facts of the case. I just knew what I'd been told. And I was like, oh yeah, the mom did it. She was a crazy bitch. And she, she's just putting her daughter out in these stupid little pageants and dressing her up as a sex object and all this. And I just repeated what I'd been told.
Exactly.
And then you start digging into it and you're like, oh my God, none of this is true. Like, none of it's true.
Yeah.
And then you learn that John buried a daughter a couple years beforehand, and then he had to bury John Benet, and then he had to bury his wife. And it's like, this poor guy. I mean, you talk about, everybody's like, oh, he was a rich guy. Oh yeah, well, I'm sure he would trade every freaking penny of that money. And he did. Mm-hmm. Because he's pretty well bankrupt now.
Yeah.
He's spent every penny of his fortune defending his family's honor and trying to get an answer in the murder of his daughter.
Right.
To where he lives in a rented house now. He doesn't even own a house.
Yeah.
The house that they owned in Boulder is right now listed at $7 million. And he's living in a rented house that's just like a run-of-the-mill spec home in a neighborhood in Utah.
Is it him selling it, or is it an owner?
No.
Owners in between selling it.
Yeah, no. He never walked through the door of that place after his daughter was murdered there. He couldn't bring himself to ever go back, which is pretty telling to his innocence, in my opinion.
Yeah. They
sold that house right after that. They couldn't get out of Boulder fast enough, and I don't blame them, the way that they were treated. And then they've been defending themselves
forever
for 30 years.
Yeah.
And there's other cases that are even older than that go back where people have just demonized these people for years and years and years. And a lot of the times it is law enforcement. This episode does not, by any stretch of the imagination, take the responsibility off law enforcement, because they do the same shit sometimes. Mm-hmm. They just latch onto a theory, they ignore the evidence, And they just chase down this theory, and they are going to convict these people no matter what. The John Benet Ramsey case is a perfect example of that, but there's millions of them out there like that, where we say the cops got television, and that was they just would look at evidence that would support their theories.
Yeah. And
so but law enforcement has this framework that they're supposed to operate within. And so is what I'm saying in this episode is true crime needs to have this same framework. And this isn't just like us citizen journalists, because there was, I recently watched a show on the John Benet case, and it was probably the most irresponsible show I've ever watched in my life. And we're going to be talking about it because I'm very pissed off about it. But
he's foreshadowing now.
I've also brought up the making a murderer. And it is so irresponsible. And, I mean, those Netflix shows, I guess you could call them kind of citizen journalists or whatever, but they're operating, believe me, on a much bigger budget than us here at Dark Dialogue. And so,
yeah, they are.
They're a hell of a lot bigger than we are. But they're as guilty as a James Renner. Yeah. It's not just the little guys that do this shit. It's not just Reddit threads and Facebook groups. It is full-on media that plays into this same shit and it is a problem with the entire genre of true crime.
Yep. Which story is going to sell the most?
Exactly.
Period.
Yes. And that's really a lot of what's behind this entire thing. That could be some pain medication. I don't know.
And when you let us jump into Brandon Embry, you're going to be very mad at some of the police in that too.
Really? That's what I'm not super familiar with. So that'll be interesting.
You're going to be very angry at one in particular, because she has one narrative and refuses to see anything else.
Yeah. And you see it so many times, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
So, did I read media doesn't just report it? I don't even remember where.
That doesn't sound...
Okay.
Nope.
So media doesn't just report it, it shapes narratives. Renner's Canadian sighting claim went viral because outlets amplified it without scrutiny. His 2016 Reddit AMA invited unverified tips, creating a speculation loop. This isn't unique. Casey Anthony's case shows how balanced reporting, giving equal weight to unverified theories, fuels outrage over truth, vilifying families without evidence. Social media accelerates this. A Reddit post or a tweet can outpace a police report, and algorithms reward engagement, not accuracy. Maura's case became a viral puzzle, not a human loss, because speculation was more shareable than silence. Platforms like X amplify this, with posts about Maura's disappearance motive gaining traction over factual updates. The cost is real. Renner's Canadian sighting theory didn't just mislead, it diverted focus from crash site forensics, suggesting Maura chose to vanish. His Fred Murray accusations forced a grieving father to defend himself, not search for his daughter. Families in other cases, Kyron Holman's, John Benet Ramsey's, face similar battles, their lives dissected for narrative appeal.
It's not just families. Investigations stall when speculation overshadows evidence, and the public loses trust in the process, chasing stories instead of solutions.
So, responsible creators reject this harm. Sheila Wysocki's Without Warning sets the benchmark. Verify tips, respect families, prioritize truth. Her 2018 Hagerman Advocacy focused on DNA testing and verified leads, collaborating with families without drama. True Crime Garage's Delphi coverage emphasized evidence, not suspects, maintaining victim respect. Their Amy Mahalovic episodes encouraged tips without exploiting her family, showing ethical engagement. At Dark Dialogue, we're committed to this same standard. We verify sources, label speculation, and center victims. Adopt a Victim embodies this. Volunteers work on vetted cases, trained in ethics, with findings owned by Dark Dialogue to prevent misuse. It's a vision for ethical crowdsourcing, not a solved case list. At least not yet.
And we're not perfect, but we're accountable. If we're not telling these stories with care, we're not telling them right.
Maura's story demands that care. As we close this episode, we renew our commitment to truth, empathy, and accountability. In our next episode, we'll explore the runaway theory, examining Maura's potential choices, psychological factors, and what the evidence tells us, always grounded in respect. Thank you for joining us tonight. Stay curious, but compassionate. Maura Murray's name isn't just a case file. It's a heartbeat, a life cut short, a family's endless ache. Here in the studio with Angela, I'm struck by how easy it is to forget that. True crime can pull us into puzzles, timelines, suspects, theories. But Maura was no mystery to those who loved her. She laughed. She dreamed. Maybe sang off key in the car. She deserved a gentler story than the one that she got. And think about Fred Murray, a father searching for his daughter, only to face whispers of guilt spun by James Renner's 2011 blog, or that unverified Canadian sighting in 2016. Those weren't truths. They were traps, luring us away from Maura's real story. The harm lingers, not in case files, but in a family's grief, compounded by strangers' words. That's why we're here, to tell stories differently, like Sheila Wysocki, who honors families with every verified step, or True Crime Garage, grounding cases in facts. Adopt a Victim is our promise, a vision where volunteers work ethically, not for fame, but for truth. We haven't solved Maura's case, but we hold her name with care. You hold it too. Your heart, your questions, they keep her story alive. Let's carry it forward together with compassion.
Here we are, wrapping another chapter of Maura Murray's story. This episode exposed the harm of reckless theories, unpacked real investigative frameworks, and reaffirmed our commitment to ethical storytelling. Maura's case isn't just a mystery, it's a call to honor truth for her and for every family still searching.
We're grateful that you're with us, and we'll keep asking questions about Maura's case with care and evidence. In our next episode, like I said, we'll dive into the runaway theory, exploring Maura's choices through a lens of respect and reason. So don't miss it.
Your support keeps this mission alive, so visit us at darkdialogue.com to join the Adopt a Victim program, our ethical research collective. Support us on Patreon, Ko-fi, or Substack to fuel our work. Like and share this episode to amplify Maura's story. Send critiques, kudos, or case suggestions to info@darkdialogue.com. We read every message.
Together, we can reshape how true crime is told with empathy, accountability, and truth. Thank you for standing with us. Until next time, keep the dialogue alive.